Welcome to Daily Drive for Thursday, May 28th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, Honda is leaning hard into hybrids to hold on to its double-digit share. Concerns about ethanol fuel blends hurting engines are overblown, and a synthetic motor oil shortage is closer than you might think. Plus, Flavio Volpe of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association talks about the delayed opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge and what it means for parts makers in North America.
Bridges go two ways. The American companies are relying on the shipment of goods into Canada, like $29 billion worth of auto parts that come into Canada every year from the U.S.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Finally, some good news for Honda. The Japanese automaker is riding a wave of hybrid momentum, and rising gas prices are helping. American Honda sales chief Lance Wolfer tells us at Automotive News the company hit 10% U.S. market share in April and is targeting that level for years to come. Hybrids made up nearly a third of Honda brand volume in the first quarter.
When the gas prices increase, consumers look at American Honda products and they consider them, and it drives additional opportunity for us for growth. So that's the biggest change in the marketplace I didn't anticipate that's really benefited us so far.
Honda is responding by ramping up hybrid production and launching targeted marketing around four key nameplates: Civic, Accord, CR-V, and Prelude. Wolfer says the company remains on track for 4% sales growth this year to roughly 1.5 million vehicles, and does not anticipate tariff-related price increases in 2026. Turns out, claims that higher ethanol fuel blends damage car engines are overblown. That's according to University of Toronto chemical engineering professor Bradley Saville. The U.S. EPA temporarily allowed nationwide E15 sales in March after Middle East tensions spiked fuel prices. That sparked viral warnings about engine damage and poor fuel economy. But Saville says E15 is approved and warranted for vehicles made since 2001. And while ethanol has lower energy density, its higher octane rating can improve engine combustion efficiency. And the synthetic motor oil shortage could last more than a year. That's according to the Independent Lubricant Manufacturers Association. It says the U.S. will run out of Group 3 base oil, the key ingredient for synthetic motor oil, as soon as next month. The cause? The ongoing U.S. war with Iran has blocked imports through the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off nearly half of U.S. supply. The association doesn't expect conditions to normalize until mid-2027. Nissan and Toyota have already sent dealerships bulletins on oil rationing and approved substitutions. Joining me now to talk more about it is Dan Shine, Senior Retail Editor here at Automotive News. Dan, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Kel, great to be with you.
All right, Dan, so dealerships are being told to ration and substitute oils. How disruptive is this actually going to be for service departments day to day?
Well, I think right now there's not much of an impact. Dealers, service directors, fixed ops directors that I spoke with are not seeing a big impact right now. They say, oh, my tanks are full, I'm okay. Some of the dealerships, like you mentioned, Nissan and Toyota, are already kind of, especially Nissan is saying, if you got X amount a year ago of a certain, 0W8 or 0W20, you're going to get half as much as you got last year, or 70% of what you got last year. So there's already some of those dealership groups that are being, kind of rationed. And Toyota's starting to make plans, factories recommends you use this Toyota synthetic blend, and we don't have it, or we're not going to have it, maybe enough of it. Okay, you're okay to use something that's a little bit off-brand for one-time use. On this vehicle, we're not going to void a warranty, that kind of thing. So there's already they're starting to creep in a little bit to dealership operations, and I think as the weeks go by and the months go by, that the impact might become more aware of what's going on.
Now, Dan, what about synthetic oil alternatives? What do service managers need to know about those?
There's really not alternatives. There's not great alternatives. So, this goes back to, again, what they call Group 3 base oils that are used to make synthetic blends. There's just the supply is completely cut off. What we have on the shores of the U.S. is what we have, and what we're going to get, what we're going to have for many months. And substitutes like a group 2 base oil, which is used more in conventional motor oils, is a substitute, for kind of a stopgap for the foreseeable future. Those can be used, and probably not really, hurt a car. I mean, you might get a little bit of gas mileage, might not be as great. So those are possibilities. So it's just, I think it's, again, there's not a lot of alternatives out there. There's not a lot of choices. It's, a lot of these vehicles want and are expected to use a synthetic, and we're running out of it. And at some point, there is not going to be any left.
Oof. All right. Well, Dan Shine, very insightful. Thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate it, Cal.
Yesterday on the show, we talked about the delayed opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge between Windsor, Ontario and Detroit. The crossing has been decades in the making, and it's finally complete, but it still hasn't opened. Held up by ongoing testing, commissioning delays, and political friction after President Trump threatened to block the crossing over trade disputes with Canada. Flavio Volpe is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He sat down with our own Greg Layson of Automotive News Canada to talk about why this bridge matters so much to the North American auto industry.
Flavio, thanks for joining me once again.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Take me back to when the unnamed Gordie Howe Bridge was first discussed. What was the logistical situation like in automotive transporting parts to and from Ontario and the United States?
Well, look, if you want to send goods, you got to go over, at the time, Matty Maroon's bridge. And it's capacity constrained, but it's also constrained by someone who can charge what he wants, when he wants. It's not just the most important commercial crossing between two G7 economies. It's the only privately held one. And so there was a really good discussion between a conservative prime minister, the Stephen Harper here up on my wall, and Barack Obama on how do we do this and what do we do? And certainly fought by the owner of the Ambassador Bridge and the Maroon family now, like any other private business would want to defend its spot there. And the American side said, look, we understand the value in it, but we don't have the money to put into it, which is amazing, but we don't have the money to put into it at the moment. But let's work a tolling agreement so that you guys front the money and then you make it back on tolls. And we did that. So the bridge is financed by Canada. Now it's financed by Canada with a very specific return agreement that worked for Canada, but mostly worked for Canada because Canada had to find another way in from Windsor to Detroit. Because at that time, much like it is today, but with more volume, the most important things that went from Canada to the U.S. and vice versa were manufactured goods. And the center of manufactured goods is Detroit, Windsor.
So what were you flagging at that time, you and your members? Were you saying this is costing us time and money? This is a bottleneck? I just wonder what you were flagging or what the parts industry and auto industry's stance was and what their recommendations were to both sides of government, whether it was U.S. or Canadian government officials.
Look, on the Canadian side, the argument was more about a bottleneck and what that bottleneck cost versus the toll on the bridge. But the toll on the bridge is, look, you got two lanes. Anytime you got an issue, you're stuck. Okay. And that costs money. But you got to go through town to get to that bridge. And if we're going to spend some money on infrastructure going around town, build the highway to a new bridge and get you right out there, get it off center, and then see if we can't get the capacity right through town, then we did. And so we did a couple things. We built capacity to the current bridge, and we've also built that long-term capacity to the new bridge. And, the travel and goods is really balanced in either direction. And so the industry writ large said, yeah, this works for us. This also allows us to grow that capacity. At the time that we'd come to the bridge decision, this cluster, this Detroit-centered cluster, was losing investment decisions to the U.S. Southeast, and in a lot of cases to Mexico. And some of those U.S. Southeast conversations were, well, access to deep water ports. And so you're going to make the stuff and you can export it out. And the Mexican argument was, look, cheap labor, cheap this, cheap that, but also We've got trade agreements with 45, 46 different countries, so you can use Mexico as a base. And the Detroit cluster was seen as, well, you're servicing the Midwest and you're servicing American markets, but you've got a lot of inertia in the way you move goods. And this bridge was one of the solutions in moving goods in the area.
To put it in context for the listeners who don't know, there was an old joke around Windsor that went as follows. You could get from Quebec to Miami and pass 13 stoplights, and 12 of them were on a stretch of basically residential roads leading into Michigan. And then there was one on the other side of the bridge before you hooked up with the interstate system that could get you all over America and avoiding stoplights. That is the bottleneck you were talking about, correct? That residential street, essentially.
Yeah, that's right.
And now it's free flowing to a brand new 8-lane bridge. How does that change the way auto industry moves goods? And how does that change in terms of monetary savings, just-in-time delivery? Because we know that's how the industry operates.
Yeah, it's all the obvious changes. Look, you can predict when a shipment's going to arrive. You can bulk up on shipments and not necessarily worry about whether there's excess capacity. We're all stuck in the Strait of Hormuz right now. There's a better calculation on fuel consumption when you're not stuck in Windsor for half an hour, when you're rolling. And the reverse is true. And also, it's a clear signal to the industry that all three levels of government understand that movement of goods is important, because we've built a monument to it. I remember talking to Eddie Francis, former mayor of Windsor, about this so many times. And, from a municipal point of view, of course, they didn't have the infrastructure dollars to commission something so expansive. But, he was dealing with General Motors had closed a transmission plant there. There was a series of closures and slowdowns on the American side. And the whole issue in Windsor was, look, how much longer is Windsor going to be in the auto business if we don't fix some of these things? We closed Essex Engine. We reopened it, with money from the federal and provincial government. But at that time, a major infrastructure project was good for Windsorites and Ontario companies. And it was very good long-term vision for anybody that knew that you had to go through Windsor to get to the U.S. Let's do that in the most painless way possible. And Eddie was a real champion of it, and he was the mayor. And Eddie's no longer the mayor. It's been a long time since Eddie's been the mayor. He probably has all his hair grew back. But this bridge couldn't be arriving at a better time. Politics aside, I think we're going to get peace on the USMCA front. I think we're going to see volumes pick back up. And the U-turn that the Americans are going to make on how they view the USMCA region as critical to their competitiveness with China and the rest of the world may actually cause a real glut of business when this stuff gets announced. Outside my window here, I could see the Ford Oakville plant. That's going to be online later this year. And better to have a romantic idea that you can get that stuff across rather quickly, like when you look at pictures of the 401 from the 60s.
You brought up USMCA and you seem to believe a deal is possible and probably likely. The other sort of monkey wrench that's been thrown into this is Donald Trump saying he won't open the bridge. So even if we get a USMCA deal, do you believe that Donald Trump will indeed approve it? Does he have any leg to stand on when he says he won't open it, or is this going to open no matter what?
Well, he's never wasted an opportunity to create negotiating friction. And I think you could file this into that. That bridge will open. It may not open the minute that we said it's going to open, but the bridges go two ways. The American companies that are relying on the shipment of goods into Canada, like $29 billion worth of auto parts that come into Canada every year from the U.S., where do they go? They go on Matty Maroon's or the Maroon's family bridge. Some of it sneaks through in other places, like through
Sarnia, for example, Port Huron.
Yeah, Sarnia or New York, Ontario bridges, but for the bulk of it goes through there. So I think he's just pressurizing the situation and making hay of it in the way that he does, but it's not. There's no way.
I want to go back to a couple things that you mentioned. First, I want to talk. You liken this to the Strait of Hormuz, or at least you showed why one passing is not enough, right? And we've seen this in auto. If you go back to the COVID-19 crisis and the blockade at the Ambassador Bridge, was that really a signal to all parties involved that, hey, we need a second span in case there is an emergency of any kind at Matty Maroon's Bridge or any other crossing for that matter.
Yeah, somewhere on my wall over here that you can't see on your screen is a framed copy of the emergency injunction the APMA got to reopen that bridge. And the way that we did it was to argue that there was irreparable harm being done on production that would never be rescheduled. And subsequent reports showed, third-party analysis showed, that was about $1 billion cost to the auto industry. That's in 5 days.
Yeah.
What we argued in the moment was this thing is so absolutely critical. It has to be cleared. It has to be cleared today. And you'll remember that everybody bitched and moaned about it, but everybody like, well, is it Windsor Police Services? Is it the OPP? Is it the CBSA? And we went and got clarity on it. But I spent like maybe the next 6 months apologizing for a bunch of idiots with hockey sticks in Hyundai Tucson, wreaked havoc because they understood. I shouldn't call them idiots because they did understand one thing. It was the only way in.
Right.
It was owned by a private company that said, I'm not going to intervene. And by the way, the blockade is at the bottom of the bridge.
You're right. It was on public roadways and public right-of-ways.
Yeah.
It was not on the actual physical structure of the bridge, which is privately owned, as you mentioned, by the Maroon family.
Yeah. So I think it helped to make the case for what was emerging physically as the second bridge over there to say, like, we're not going to have that problem over there. Now, of course, we made some legislative changes and the provincial government said, hey, by the way, you go to jail and we can charge you, you can fine you $100,000, not a traffic ticket. Don't fool around. But that moment was exactly why, that was our Strait of Hormuz moment, exactly why you should have other paths.
The other thing I want to circle back on is you brought it up and I wanted to discuss this. It was a conservative prime minister and a Democratic U.S. president that announced the deal, that got together and got this done. Two parts. One, was the political relationship back then better? And two, was there a better understanding of automotive supply integration between the conservatives under Harper and the Democrats under Barack Obama? Was the relationship politically better, and was there a better understanding of how tied together North America is in the auto industry?
Well, I'll say all the relationships on either end of the spectrum, on both sides of the 49th parallel, have been better than any relationship that Donald Trump is the counterparty on. Mostly because American presidents, while they always understood that they had size and leverage over Canada, always said, okay, well, Canada is our most important trading relationship. So we're not going to be self-destructive while being mean-spirited to them and cut off our nose to spite our face. They know how exposed they were. And so it made those relationships easier to manage because there was an expectation of professionalism. Nixon hated Pierre Trudeau. And there's a famous story where he called him an a-hole. And Trudeau, having heard that, said, I've been called worse things by better people. And neither one of those two sides of that conversation meant better relations between the two countries, but the relations, and Nixon put a tariff on Canadian automotive goods in 1971 that caused a crisis as well. But we don't remember that. We don't get taught that because it was within the regular spectrum of how these two countries would operate with each other. So Stephen Harper worked very well with Barack Obama, even if they may not exactly have liked each other. Now, your question on whether this administration or this Canadian government really understands and or appreciates the integration of the automotive trade, I would argue that Donald Trump and his administration probably understands it better than many of their predecessors. And that's why he pushed that button. And that's why he's using it as the wedge. Like, I know how much pain this is. And by the way, I don't care about you. Here you go.
That makes sense. My last question to you, as we all know you're a sports fan, do you approve of the name, the Gordie Howe International Bridge? It seems like it's right up your alley. I just wonder your thoughts to get us out of here on something light. Your thoughts on the name.
We've all kind of spent the better part of the last year cringing at a phrase that really worked for about a month, which was elbows up. But Gordie Howe was known for his elbows. He was very good. He was not flashy. but he was the best player on the ice, and he was the strongest guy on the ice. And he told a story with his elbows and the curve of his stick. But he did it for the Detroit Red Wings. He was Captain Canada when he was the captain of the team in the industrial heartland of the USA. That bridge could not have been named after anybody else. And frankly, they should have called it the Gordie Howe Bridge twice, because he will stand as a testament to Canada-US culture, family, and relationships long after all of us are gone and everybody who poked everybody else's eye. There was only one number 9.
Appreciate it as always, Flavio.
Always a pleasure, Greg.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Dan Shine and Urvash Kakaria for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on North American trade and tariffs, the synthetic motor oil shortage, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for more on the motor oil shortage with analyst Nate Chinecko of Ducker Carlisle.
We can't just turn on more oil supply coming into the market. And even if you could get the base stock, then like the refined capacity is different, and it's really not set up to do that.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.